Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Wry Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music. It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Wry Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Wry Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune. Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 178 with prolific best-selling crime writer Leigh Russell, with lots to say about her writing process, practical tips for those of us considering writing a series, and how keeping things fresh helps her achieve such a prodigious output. Before we get to the interview, a very quick catch-up from me. I've continued to write every day, not with any pressure to achieve any particular high word count, but to keep my story moving and stay in the world that I'm creating. I'm still enjoying myself and I'm not getting bogged down in the quicksands of doubt, worrying about how I'm going to resolve the story or sort out logistical issues, because that's what the rewrite's for. So let's just get the words down. I've also begun the mammoth task of collating material for what I hope will be the first Joined Up Writing branded non-fiction book. It's something I'm going to be returning to continually over the course of this year, so stay tuned for more information on that. But one of the things that came out of my chat with today's guest, Leigh Russell, was the idea of working on more than one project at a time. Now, I'm not sure I could do that with multiple fiction projects, but I think it could work for me having a non-fiction book to work on in contrast to the novel. It just uses different parts of my creative brain, and I like the idea of using up all my fiction fuel on the novel before hopping over to the joined-up book, which is more about finding the best interview material and formulating the themes and through line that will bring everything together. And on that subject, I really need your help. The whole reason for wanting to do the book in the first place is to create something useful, inspiring and evergreen that writers can return to again and again whenever they're seeking motivation or practical advice on their writing journey. And as it's the joined up writing book, that means my first concern is you, my listeners. So what would you like from a book like the one I'm describing? Would you want it to include some exercises or writing prompts, or just to pull out lots of tidbits from almost 10 years of interviews that I've done? How much of my own journey do you want to hear? Maybe you think this first volume should solely focus on the path to publication and the many ways my guests have got there. Or do you want me to talk about writing more generally? Why do we do it? How can it help our mental well-being or make sense of the world? Perhaps you just want me to hone in on a specific genre. I don't know. I'm right at the beginning of my journey with it, currently transcribing hours and hours of material ready to sift and prospect for gold. But I do know I don't want the book to simply be a bunch of transcribed interviews. So there has to be a focus, and I want you to give me your input with that. And the best way to do that is to email me at wayne@waynekellywrites.com. I genuinely read and reply to every message I'm sent, and it means so much when I hear from you anyway. So feel free to tell me about your own writing projects, your worries or issues with your work in progress, or just let me know what you'd like to hear in future episodes. But definitely get in touch with your thoughts on the book, as now is the time to do it while I'm at such an early stage in the process. Other ways to get in touch, well, you can tweet me at JU or Mr. Kelly to you. You can email, as I've mentioned, wayne@waynekellywrites.com, or you can drop me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up, and you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows, events, workshops, and of course the book. And one more reminder before we get to the real reason you tuned in, today's interview. you that it's so helpful if you can rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you listen to it on. There are so many great shows out there vying for your attention, so it's hard for a little podcast like mine to stand out. So I cannot stress enough how important it is that you share the show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever else you do your socials. But also, have you actually mentioned it to your in real life writing friends? Have you told your writing groups? Gently take their phone and guide them to the podcast, and be sure to make them subscribe. And if you haven't subscribed, maybe you just download it every week, but subscribe. That helps me get seen and brings other people to the podcast. Right, it's been quite a while since I've done such a hard sell on that, but even if you've left a rating and review in the past, it doesn't hurt to do a new one. Anyway, let's get to today's chat with Leigh Russell. So Leigh writes the internationally best-selling crime series featuring police detectives Geraldine Steele and Ian Peterson, which are currently in production for television, by the way. She also writes the mystery series featuring investigative reporter Lucy Hall. She's about to launch a cosy crime series, and she's got more than 30 books out into the world already. Her latest book, Final Term, is out right now. So enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end to wrap things up. Okay, Leigh, thanks so much for joining me on Joined Up. Really appreciate it. So why don't you just start off just by giving us a sense of where you are and how things are going?
Where I am is somewhere I never actually expected to be. I didn't start writing till I was fairly mature. My children had grown up and left home. And I think I just had some space in my head. So I started writing about 15 years ago. And when I started writing, I never expected anybody would read anything I wrote, let alone publish it. And yet here I am. I think I've had now 30 novels published. They're selling all over the world. We've had nearly 2 million books sold in one of my series. And I'm still going strong.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I'm definitely going to come on to that huge catalogue and amazing body of work that you've got. So I think your most recent book was Final Term. Is that right? Geraldine Steele book.
That's correct.
That's just come out. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
It came out this month, and it's the 19th, believe it or not, in my Geraldine Steele series.
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm very conscious when I'm writing my series with each book that I'm writing for two audiences. I'm writing for my fan base who've been waiting for the next book to come out, who've been following my detective Geraldine Steele throughout her career. But I'm also writing for readers who've not come across my detective yet and not read any of my books. And I've been very pleased with the early reviews of Final Term, the 19th in the series, who have all been saying that you don't need to have read the previous 18 books to enjoy this one. It's a little bit tricky, but as with everything else when you're writing, it's a bit of a challenge and you have to think about it and find ways around it. And so I can be fairly quick in saying, just something like Geraldine was very pleased to see so-and-so because they'd worked together before.
Yeah.
Fans of the series don't get bored by pages and pages of my repeating things they already know. Yeah. But new readers are put in the picture fairly swiftly and neatly. So it's something I have to think about. It's something I do think about. And as I say, I'm really writing for two readers now when I'm writing my series.
It must be tricky, yeah. It must be tricky, especially when you're that many books in. It must be difficult to... Sometimes you must just assume, well, they must know that. They don't know that by now, but you can't, can you?
No, you can't. You cannot assume anything. And it's everything that you do in writing is a balancing act. How much do you tell your readers? How much do you withhold? Writing crime fiction, murder stories is a good example of this, because you need to give your readers enough clues so that if they're alert, they can work out what's happened and who the killer is. But you don't want to spell it out because readers like to work these things out for themselves and they like to speculate. And I find that particularly difficult because most of my readers are very skilled in the crime genre. Most of them are far more intelligent than I am. And I'll try to put in a misdirection and readers will think, here comes a misdirection. He's the killer because
So you've kind of got to double bluff them.
Yeah. And so, again, with writing a series, with how much to tell your reader and how much not to repeat, is a balancing act, really. I want new readers to the series to enjoy the book so much that they then go back and read the whole series. But I also want existing fans of the series to be moved forward through Geraldine's life. So as I move on through the series and Geraldine's backstory grows, it becomes increasingly a challenge, but so far so good. As I say, I was very pleased with the early reviews, and I hope that existing fans, I mean, some of them have already been feeding back and have absolutely loved Final Term, which is great, because I feel that writing the 19th book, to sustain the series over such a number of books, I'm quite proud of the fact that I've done that. In fact, Final Term was selected as a top pick of the week by the Times Crime Book Club. So
congrats!
It's holding up. It's holding up against.
That's good. Well, can you give us a sense of the setup for Final Term? Just give people a sense of the plot.
Okay, so we start with the body, and then nobody knows who killed them, and by the end, Geraldine still works it out.
That's very good.
The premise of Final Term is that there is a school teacher who is accused by a teenage girl of molesting him, and he denies it. But the way things work in the real world, if there's a hint of suspicion against a teacher, they're instantly suspended while an investigation is conducted. Mm-hmm. So this teacher is suspended. The reader doesn't know if he was responsible or not. While the investigation is started by the school, the girl's body is discovered. She's been murdered. And so the police then get involved. And the teacher is a suspect. Did he kill her because he lost his temper, because she's ruining his career? Is he guilty or not? Either way, his whole life is ruined. And so that's as much as I'm going to say. But it's quite a sobering premise, really, because teachers have to be very, very careful. And
so do you remember what the initial inspiration for that was? Was there kind of something that kind of did your jumping off point for that? Was it something you'd seen in the news? Where did the
No, I don't take inspiration from the news. I don't take inspiration from real crime. I don't like reading about real crimes. I find it too upsetting. I know it sounds a bit glib, but it's absolutely true. I like my crime to be in fiction, and I find crime in the real world is just too upsetting. Mm-hmm. It's basically one person causing another person to suffer just for their own selfish needs or desires. And there's nothing, I find nothing entertaining or redeeming about that at all. But within fiction, it becomes a different animal. It's goodies and baddies, isn't it? And there's the plot, the mystery, the twist. Where did I get the inspiration from? Do you want an honest answer to that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so writing a series, I always have a publisher's deadline coming up in maybe 6 months' time. So I sit down and I think, right, I've got to deliver a manuscript in 6 months' time. What on earth am I going to write about? And from that pressure comes an idea pops into my head, and I start to run with it, and off I go. I don't really know where the idea came from, so it just
we often don't. There's not always a starting off point in terms of a definite thing that you can pinpoint, as you say, and there's nothing will make you more productive and think faster than an impending deadline.
Great cure for writer's block. I've never suffered from writer's block because I don't have the time or the luxury really to sit around and think, oh, what shall I write about? I just have to come up with something. And so far it's worked. And maybe one day it won't, but I just keep running with it and see what happens.
You're sprinting with it with the amount of books that you've written.
Yeah, I mean, we just hope for the best, don't we? It's all any of us can do, really.
Just crack on. So when you wrote what would become the first book of the series, which I think was cut short, was it? Did you have any inkling that it would develop into such a long series? And when did you kind of realize that Geraldine was a character you wanted to spend more time with?
Well, it really came from my publisher. I had absolutely no idea that this would be a long-running series. And I have to say that when I teach creative writing courses, which I do from time to time, I'm a great person to teach this because I didn't know what I was doing. I made every possible mistake in the book. And there's a lot of things I would have done differently had I known when I started what I know now. I mean, just to give you one example, when I wrote Cut Short, Geraldine is in her late 30s. Well, now that we're book 20 coming out next year, she's had to be a bit like Poirot and not age.
Yeah.
So I had to fudge this.
She's not like Rebus. No.
So if I had known, I would have started with her being, fresh, new
recruit. Yeah.
So I've made all sorts of mistakes. I mean, there are numerous mistakes I've made along the way, just through naivety and ignorance. Just a little tip for aspiring authors: if you set your novel in a real place, then you will get a following there. You can make contacts with the local library. You can make contacts with bookshops. I didn't know any of this. When I was writing Cut Short, I just made up a town in the middle of nowhere. I found a blank space in the middle of Kent on the map and just put a town there. Well, of course, when the book came out, I couldn't contact local libraries. I couldn't contact.
That's a good tip, yeah.
There weren't any. They didn't exist. The place didn't exist. When Geraldine, partway through the series, about book, I can't remember. It might have been book 6 or book 10. When she moves to York, that was fantastic because people in York loved the fact that my detective had moved to York, and I've got a huge following now in York. I still have no following in this fictitious. So that's just another.
And it's an excuse for you to spend lots of time going to York and doing research.
That's why she moved there. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you can go up and down the shambles lots of times.
Yeah. In terms of whether I had any idea, no. When I started writing Cut Short, I didn't think anybody else would ever read it, let alone publish it. I had no idea it would become the first in a long-running series. I was just writing it for myself. But then I just sent it off to a couple of publishers, just on the off chance. This was back in the day. I printed out what I'd written, put it in big brown envelopes, as we did back then. And I think nowadays publishers will probably only accept electronic submissions. But this was before the ebook revolution really took off.
Sure, yeah.
And and so No Exit Press, fortunately, liked what I'd done, and they offered me a 3-book deal. So at this point, I knew I was writing a trilogy, but then the book started to take off. They were selling really well. And before I'd written the 3rd book, they offered me another 3-book deal. And so we went on. Every time I was writing the final book in the deal, my publishers would offer me another deal.
Which is a great situation to be in. Which is
wonderful, yes, because when I write the Geraldine Steele books, I know that I have a publisher. And so I just have to focus on writing the books. So, as I say, this was before the ebook revolution, but ebooks were around. They had just started. And I think I was fortunate to be picked up by No Exit Press, who are a fantastic publisher, a really, really top-notch publisher, publishers of crime. And I've just worked with them ever since.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So in terms of, I mean, I know from reading a little bit about it, and you kind of referenced it in your introduction there, but in terms of actually how you came to writing, give us a sense of that. What are your earliest memories of writing, or was it really not that long before you kind of took off on this journey that you're on now?
Cut Short was the first novel I'd ever written. When I was growing up, there were not all these crime writing courses, creative writing courses that have proliferated recently. And it never even crossed my mind that I might write one day. I was an avid reader. Now, the best advice I've ever come across for aspiring writers was something that William Faulkner said. And he said, read, 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 read everything. And I'm going to paraphrase now because I can't remember the exact quotation, but he basically said, through reading everything you can get your hands on, you develop and hone your own judgment. And then you start to write, and you will know if something is working or not. And I think inadvertently, I trained myself to write because I was an avid reader for about 50 years, or well, maybe 40 years since I was able to read. I just read constantly. I studied literature at university for 4 years, and I then went into teaching A-level English. So my whole life was around books, but I was always involved in books as a reader. And it's really two sides of a coin. Whether somebody else is taking you by the hand and leading you into a different world, or whether you yourself are creating a different world and taking your readers into it, you're going into a different world. And so I think I trained myself to write through reading. But I've also been incredibly fortunate because one of the great advantages about having a publisher as opposed to self-publishing is that your publisher will find you a top editor who is suited to what you write. They know the editors, and top editors, unless you're an incredibly successful and wealthy self-published author, the top editors will tend to work for publishers because obviously they get repeat work. And so I've been incredibly fortunate that although I didn't really know what I was doing when I started writing, I've been able to learn on the job. And I've now had about 30 books professionally edited and structurally edited and copy edited and proofread, all the rest of it, gone through the whole process. And so I've learned a lot from my editors. And so I learned from reading, and I've learned from being told all the things I was doing wrong when I was writing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you think by now I would know what I'm doing, but I run workshops from time to time. I do some work for the Royal Literary Fund, and I go into schools and I talk to sixth form about writing skills. And one of the things I say to them is that you would think, having written 30 books, that I would know what I'm doing by now. But I'm still feeling my way, and I'm still learning. I still have so much to learn, and I still get things wrong because writing is a process. And unless you're Shakespeare, nobody is born at the end of the writing journey. We're learning as we go. And as I say, I've been incredibly fortunate to have really excellent editors who have not held back and have taught me so much. And when I occasionally do critiques myself for the Crime Writers Association, I run their critiquing service. And I always say to people that I'm going to do a critique for, I'm going to be ruthless.
Yeah.
Because there's no point really in blowing smoke up somebody's backside. When you're critiquing somebody's work or when you're editing, your aim is to help them to make this the best book it can possibly be. And you can only improve things by changing things that are not quite working. So I still feel that I'm learning. And I think it's just such a wonderful thing to be able to do, to write. It means I'm never bored because I've always got some problem to work out. Like, okay, somebody gets killed here. How am I going to work it so that the body is discovered somewhere else so that the killer can't be traced? Because most murders in the real world, most murders are solved pretty quickly. I mean, you think about it. Somebody loses their temper and kills their spouse in their front room.
Yeah.
There's a knife there with the husband or wife's fingerprints on it. It's pretty obvious who the murderer is. I need to have a murder at the beginning of the book, and my detectives have to come across as intelligent, but it has to take them the whole length of a book for them to work out who the murderer is. So there has to be some puzzle between when somebody is killed and when the body gets discovered and how the murderer gets found out.
With the amount of books that you write, you're never without a puzzle to sort out.
Exactly. Yes.
So what do you think you've actually, obviously you've kind of said how much you've learned over the course of that sort of 15 years that you've been doing it, and 30 books or whatever. Can you give us a sense of some of the things? What were some of the early lessons that you kind of learned over those first 2 or 3 books? Or maybe even is there anything that kind of stands out from that very first book? Because that was probably the biggest kind of leap forward for you, I'm guessing, because that would have been the first time that you'd worked with a professional editor looking at your work and probably pointing out things that now for you are second nature.
Yeah, I think I would say in general, what I've learned through the whole process, through the years, is to write for a reader. When I wrote the first draft of Cut Short, I was writing just for myself, and I was having great fun. And I was writing, just writing exciting scenes. And every other page there was a murder or a drug heist or a kidnap or something happened. The whole thing didn't really make sense. And my editor told me to take out all the little subplots that were going on and just focus on the one main plot, because the poor reader wouldn't have had a clue what was going on. And I've learned to write with the reader in mind. So it's not just what I want to say, but it's what is a reader going to understand here? What is a reader going to take from this? Is this going to be too obvious? Am I hiding the clues well enough? Am I really taking the reader into the scene? And here we come to that old chestnut, which is so important, which is show, don't tell. Mm-hmm. And I say this on almost every critique that I write: show, don't tell. I think it was it Ibsen who said, "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of moonlight on glass." Something like that. I'm paraphrasing again.
Yeah.
The reader wants to be like a fly on the wall. They want to be observing the scene as if they're there. They want to, experience the sounds and the smells and how things feel, as well as just seeing what's going on. So I think that's one of the things that I've learned. I've forgotten what your question was now.
No, it was just in general. I mean, that was a great answer. That's in terms of things that might have stood out, especially in the early days when you first started getting this feedback from professional editors. What were some of the first big lessons that you learned? Because I suspect that you kind of made a bit of a quantum leap in terms of where you were before at the beginning of book 1 to the beginning of even book 2. I should imagine that was probably your biggest leap, wasn't it? In the fact that you went from literally knowing nothing of that process in terms of working with an editor and the kinds of things that they may or may not say, to then book 2 straight away. You kind of know how the game works. You've got a sense of the kinds of things that they're looking for and what they're going to pull you up on.
Yes, I mean, I think I've gained a sense of the importance of structure, that readers need to be following a certain line of a plot. And obviously you go off into all sorts of different, red herrings, but there needs to, the whole thing needs to be structured. So I think there's, show, don't tell, there's the structure of a book, but most importantly, there's writing for a reader. And I think with writing, there are 2 processes, really. There's the creative outpouring, and that really can take you into a scene, because you need to be there yourself and take you inside a character's head. You need to, Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, again I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, you need to walk around inside somebody else's skin. If you're creating characters, you do need to empathize. You need to really be that character while you're writing from their point of view. So you need to really show your readers. You need to have a structure so readers know what on earth is going on. And you need to, but I think there's the creative outpouring, and then there's the craft of the book. And I think they're both important. And I think when you're teaching creative writing, it's a misnomer, because you can't teach creativity. You've got it or you haven't. That's it.
Yeah.
But you can teach a great deal about the craft of writing.
Yeah.
And I tend to, in common with, I'm sure, a lot of people, I tend to write a scene and I'm in the scene, but then I'll go over it almost with a reader's eye and reword it and change it. And so it's a process. It's a process. And people sometimes say to me, how do you know when your book is finished? Because you can go on endlessly tweaking things, can't you?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
People spend decades writing one book.
Yeah.
But for me, I know when it's finished when the production manager says, right, we're going to print tomorrow. And then that's it. There's nothing more you can do.
That's it, yeah.
And then you have to just forget about it, because you always think of things afterwards that you could have done, and would it have been better to have said this or that? But it's too late. But by then I'm involved in the next book. So, I mean, I've been very fortunate when Cut Short came out. And it did very well, actually. And it was shortlisted for a major award and all the rest of it, which put us on the map. But I didn't really have much time to stress about how it was being received or look at reviews and whatever, because I was writing the next book, Road Closed. And it's been like that right through my writing career, however one book is done, that's out of my head, I'm on to the next one.
Well, that was one of the things I was going to talk to you about, the prolific nature of your writing. So aside from Geraldine Steele, you've also got the Ian Peterson books, the Lucy Hall series, a bit of historical crime thrown in there, and some other standalones and different bits and pieces. And I think I'm probably right in thinking that your first book didn't come out until 2012. Is that right? So that's 11 years ago, more or less.
I think it was 2009.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, even so, that's you know, it's not a great deal. It's not a great deal of time to write 30 books. So my question is, how the hell did you achieve that level of output? Because obviously it is really impressive. So, is it just give me a sense of how you are so prolific? Because some writers will be listening to that. Some people, they will struggle to write a book a year, as in, from start to end, get the whole thing edited and all the rest of it, and then think about going on to something else. But you're obviously you're going way beyond that.
Yeah, I think I would say, first of all, that it's important to focus on quality rather than quantity. Because,
sure, yeah.
I mean, my mother, bless her, she taught me to touch type many years ago. And I type very fast. Now, I could, in theory, write a book in a week. I have actually written, my fastest was I wrote a book in 3 weeks. It wasn't my best book. It got published and it did okay, but it was not my best book. Mm-hmm. I type very fast, but I always say that writing a book is not what happens on the keyboard. It's what happens between your ears.
Definitely.
And you need time to mull things over. Yeah. So I don't think quantity of output is necessarily any gauge of quality. But I do type very fast, and it's having an idea. Once I've got an idea, it might take me 3 weeks to think of an idea, but once I've got an idea, I just run with it. I type very fast, and I type, I don't know, probably as fast as I speak. And so I guess that's how I do it.
But do you...
I have lots of ideas somehow. I mean, I quite like to be writing. When I'm reading, I quite like to have a couple of books on the go that are quite contrasting. So depending on what mood I'm in, I might be reading something fairly kind of heavy going and serious and thought-provoking, like Graham Greene, who I absolutely love. He's such a brilliant writer. But sometimes you just can't kind of handle that. You want something lighter, and then I might look at, I don't know, Ian Moore or P.G. Woodhouse or something.
Yeah.
And it's the same really when I'm writing. I like to have 2 books on the go. I'm in a very lovely position at the moment because we're working on the 20th Geraldine Steele. Geraldine Steele is a fairly gritty police procedural. I mean, I try to make them authentic, although they're not, because in the real world, detective inspectors spend most of their time sitting behind a desk juggling budgets. Mm-hmm. Not very exciting narrative there. Yeah. Geraldine Steele is always there, seeing the murder victim in situ. She's first on the scene, all the rest of it. So it's not completely authentic, but I have to serve the story.
Of course, yeah.
That is the most important thing, to write a good story. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. So Geraldine Steele, they're not gory books. That blood and guts don't inspire me at all. I think inside we're all the same. It's what's going on in people's minds that interests me. But that's the kind of tone of Geraldine Steele books. They're fairly dark. I'm also writing a different series at the moment, which is actually launching in March, which is much lighter, and it's cosy crime, really.
Yeah.
And these are the Poppy Mystery
I
series.
saw on your website, yeah, that's coming soon.
And these were inspired by my daughter's little rescue puppy. And so the first one is called Barking Up the Right Tree. So, I mean, that just gives you a sense of the tone of the books. They're not humorous, but they're a bit lighter, a bit more Agatha Christie meets Bridget Jones kind of thing. Quite different to Geraldine Steele, who's very, very focused on her career, very, very serious about solving these murder cases. She says somewhere she's working for the voiceless dead. She seeks justice for the voiceless dead. She takes it very seriously. So it's quite fun writing two different series at the same time.
And do you find that kind of helps you with your productivity from the point of view that you can kind of, and probably it's partly to do with your personality, I suspect, but the fact that you kind of need something to hop over to stop yourself kind of getting stale or a bit sort of down in it, like as you say, if it's just unremittingly.
Yeah, possibly. But the best cure, if you like, that I've had for if I get a bit stuck or writer's block, whatever, I read.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read really good authors, and it doesn't have to be crime, I read all sorts of things. I mean, at the moment, I just read a Leigh Child, who is an absolute master at taking you straight into the drama, the excitement.
Yeah.
And after that, I read The Scapegoat by Daphne du Maurier, which I'd not come across before. And she writes really beautifully. And now I'm reading Anxious People by Frederick Backman, which I'm not quite so sure about. And so I tend to sort of swap between serious novels and lighter-hearted novels.
Just keep yourself interested.
Yeah, just I go through sort of reading binges almost. Over December, I had an Agatha Christie binge. I've never been a great fan of Agatha Christie, but then I started reading her over Christmas, and I read about 6 of them because they're such fun. I recently read The Man Who Fell to Earth by Tevitt. What's his name? Walter Tevitt, and he's the author who wrote The Queen's Gambit.
Oh, right.
And that was a very good book. And I read A Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes, which is a sad novel, really, quite poignant. And again, beautifully crafted prose. When I'm reading, I do like to read authors who write beautiful prose. And I think that I find that inspiring, really.
And obviously the amount of output that you've got, and you, as you say, you work in the crime genre as well, which obviously is predominantly anyway, and is very kind of plot driven. Do you, when you sit, so if you were sitting down to write to start, let's say you were sitting down to start a new book tomorrow, are you someone that needs to know exactly where you're going at the outset? Do you do lots and lots of notes and plan where the plot's going, or do you go, right, here we go, and you're off and you're away and you type in?
I would love to say that I plan everything out perfectly. Jeffrey Deaver, brilliant author. He's so clever and a lovely, lovely man, actually. He's really sweet. And he plans his books out. He says he spends, I think, 6 weeks, he said, planning his books. And he writes a synopsis for each chapter, which is such a brilliant way of going about it, because then you can change things and swap things around. And when he's got everything sorted, then he starts to write and he can just focus on the writing. And then at the other extreme, you have Leigh Child, who sits down and starts to write and just see what happens. And he lets the characters.
Stephen King's the same, yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love to be like Jeffrey Deaver, but I'm afraid I'm more like Leigh Child. I have a starting point, and I do know where we're going to end up. It's a bit like, I mean, when you write a book, you're taking your reader on a journey, and you know where you're starting, and you know where you want to end up.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have a rough idea of how you're going to get there, but on the way, you might take a detour somewhere and find a better route, or you might come across a roadblock and have to turn back and go somewhere else. So I know where I start. I know where I'm going to end up. Occasionally I change the killer partway through.
Yeah.
But generally I have a rough idea where I'm going. But how I'm going to get there, I'm never quite sure. And I let the characters sort of decide for me, really. Because you might have an idea, you think you're going to do X, but then the characters just don't seem as if they would behave in that way. Or you might have a light bulb moment and think, oh, but what if this character didn't do this thing I'm planning for them to do?
Yeah.
And I think
it spins off to somewhere else.
For me, it makes the whole process more organic and more fun and more exciting. And there's always that kind of terror that, what if it's not going to work out? And I think
and I think everybody's different, because I think, I mean, I probably sit somewhere between the two things. I err more on the side of just flying by the seat of my pants most of the time, and occasionally I kind of have to stop and think about actually where am I going and what would I like to happen. But at the same time, I think part of that is because when I've tried to do it the other way, and like really kind of make loads and loads of notes and just try and plot the whole thing, is I get bored. Not just of the actual plotting, the idea of sitting down and going, oh, I've got to write that thing today, and this is exactly what happens. There's not that. I don't know whether you're the same, but the fun for me when you sit down to start a scene or a chapter or whatever is it, like as you've just said, it is sort of a bit of terror as well, because you've got to write it. But it is at the moment, literally anything could happen. I think I know what's going to happen, but occasionally your character will do something that you didn't expect, or they'll react in a different way, or you'll realize there's something in the scene that you hadn't seen or you didn't realize was going to be there before you started writing it.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the fun of it. I mean, I think terror and excitement are sort of two sides.
Definitely.
Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So how do you manage to, how and when do you write? Have you kind of got a schedule? I mean, obviously you have got a schedule to a certain extent, because you've basically got another deadline that's coming in. But how do you kind of fit it around real life? Have you kind of got a set time that you prefer to write? Do you like to write in the morning and then do something else in the afternoon, or do you? Give me a sense of how that works.
Well, I mean, yeah, people ask me, am I disciplined? And the answer is no. I just write whenever and wherever I can. I do all my writing on an iPad, and it's great because I can take it around with me, and it means that wherever I am, I can write. And if I'm on a train journey, if I have a long train journey, great, that's another chapter written. I get the most writing done when I'm sitting at my desk at home. I'm not a morning person. I'm really not. And I think my creative nous really kicks off about 2:00 in the afternoon. And then I can stay awake till quite late. But I'm trying to recalibrate so I don't go to bed quite so late and I get up a bit earlier.
So you're more of an owl than a lark.
Yeah, naturally I am, yes. But I mean, it's just really a question of I write whenever and wherever I can. And if I have a spare 5 minutes, I'll write a paragraph.
You say you're not disciplined, but obviously there's not necessarily regimented in terms of when you do it, but you are disciplined in the fact that you are hitting your deadlines, and you basically essentially you're putting out sort of at least 2 books a year.
Yeah, I think I would say driven rather than disciplined.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
I just as long as I have something to say, I keep writing. F. Scott Fitzgerald said, "You don't write because you want to say something. You write because you have something to say. And as long as I have a story, I will write it." And I don't really understand people who say, I want to write a book, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to write. Because I think you write because you have the story to tell. And I do think that we don't find our stories. You asked me earlier on where I find my inspiration. Do I look in the newspapers, whatever? I just don't think we find our stories. I think the stories find us.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to wait, and the story comes. You have a scene or a character. Most of my books begin, certainly my Geraldine Steele novels, they all begin with the character of the killer. Somebody is going to kill somebody else. Why? Who are they? What are they doing? What is it drives one person to kill another person? It's very extreme behavior, isn't it? Yeah. And I mean, I have to say, I'm completely opposed to physical violence in any shape or form. But if somebody was threatening my life or threatening the life of a member of my family, and I had a gun in my hand and knew how to use it, which I wouldn't know what to do with it, but let's say I did, would I pull that trigger? Of course I would. If it was me or the intruder, let's say.
Yeah.
In that moment, yes. I think to kill another person is an insane act.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's possibly something we are all capable of, given enough fear, enough...
And to a certain extent, something we're all kind of fascinated by because,
and I think
it's so extreme.
Some people, I think to kill another person is an insane act. I think for some people are just insane. For some people, that cutoff point is not, it's my life or his or hers. For some people, it might be, they've annoyed me. I mean,
that's right. Or they're just in the way of something I need to do.
Yeah, there are psychopaths who would kill another person, like I might kill a wasp, just because they get away. And there are people who are driven beyond endurance. I mean, if you take a woman who's been horribly abused by her husband, and then she sees that he's starting to abuse her daughter, for example, there are so many situations. Yeah. There are so many reasons. I mean, my killers, some of them are psychopaths. Some of them actually enjoy killing. Some of them they feel they're driven to it. Some of them just lose the plot. There are all sorts of reasons why. Hatred, greed, jealousy. And these are the things that I'm exploring in my novels. And the other thing that I think makes crime fiction particularly interesting is that it does allow us to explore other issues in society. So we're not only looking at how individuals behave in a particular situation, but how do we as a society behave? So, as I say, the killer in Cut Short, society should have been, should have been supervising him. Social services are so stretched, they can't do everything. They have to deal with all the insoluble problems. Mm-hmm. It's an issue, it's a problem, isn't it? Yeah. And when Geraldine moved to London, I thought, I can't really write a series about a detective set in North London and never mention guns. Now, I don't like guns. I don't like anything about guns. I think they're one of the worst inventions mankind has ever come up with. But of course, most people who own guns, they're not evil master criminals. They're dysfunctional people. They're drug addicts. They're kids.
Sure, yeah.
This is an issue, isn't it? Another of my novels, I look at the issue of homelessness.
Yeah.
So there are these social issues in each of my Geraldine Still novels. I try to explore a different social issue. I have no answers, but we should be.
Yeah, and that's what's great about the crime genre, isn't it? In general.
Yeah, it adds another layer of interest, so that it's not only individuals and how they behave, but it's also how we as a community, how we as a society behave. And so I think it makes it, adds another level of interest to the books.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're obviously passionate about the genre itself as well. And I know that you mentioned it earlier as well, that you're kind of involved with the Crime Writers Association, CWA.
Yes, I chair the Debut Dagger Award. I'm chair of judges for the Debut Dagger Award, trying to support new and emerging writers, because I think it's so important to keep supporting emerging writers. So I do some critiques, I do some creative writing courses, not a lot because I don't have time. But I think the crime fiction world is very, very supportive. I think you find that crime writers like to help each other, because we do, as you say, have a passion for the genre. And there are different literary festivals. I've got some really good friends that I've made along the way, fellow writers. And I've always found that the writers who are further along on their journey are very, very supportive. I've had wonderful support from Lee Child and Jeffrey Deaver and Peter J, Martina Cole. They've all given me very positive blurb quotes for my books and helped me along the way. And I like to do the same for other writers who are not as far along the journey as I am. And there's a very nice camaraderie to it, I think.
Yeah, it's great. So as we kind of move towards wrapping things up and letting you go about your day again, so if you could start again tomorrow, if you were starting fresh tomorrow, what do you think you would tell your younger self? Is there anything that you'd do differently?
Oh, so much. Yes. I mean, as I said, I'd start Geraldine being younger. I would start the books in a particular location. What else would I do differently? I don't know. I think it's William McIlvanney. I don't know if you've come across him. He's the father of time. Yeah. He's a wonderful. I mean, he's no longer with us. He's a wonderful crime writer, and he said, "I don't think you want to overanalyze it." And I do see sometimes. I see submissions for the debut dagger, and they're really good and they're really well written. But you kind of know that they have done a creative writing course because they're doing everything absolutely right. And sometimes you want something that's a little bit more zingy and out of the box.
Yeah.
And so is there anything I would do differently? I don't know, because I agree with William McIlvanney. You don't want to overanalyze this too much. I think there's a magic to fiction. And I think sometimes when you're writing, and I'm sure you find this, you just do something almost instinctively. And obviously, there's no magic to it. There's something in your subconscious that is prompting you to do this. I mean, just as an obvious example, sometimes a character will do or say something near the beginning of a book, and I don't know why, but it just feels right. And then later on in the book, I realised, that's why they said or did that.
That's right, yeah.
Up to this moment. I didn't realise it at the time consciously. I'm not prescient. It was just an idea mulling away in my subconscious.
Exactly, it's just burning away there in the back brain.
If you try and analyse it too much and pin these things down, I think you can lose something. You can lose the creativity, I guess. You don't want the craft to overwhelm the creativity. So I don't really think too much about what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
You don't want to analyse it too much.
No. I
mean, don't want to dissect it because it might die.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, that's right. When I'm teaching creative writing, I have a lot to say because I've made so many mistakes along the way and I've learned so much from my editors. But I think in terms of one's own writing, you have to trust yourself. I think that's the best advice that I can give to other writers is trust yourself. You are a writer. Trust yourself. And sometimes you take yourself off in the wrong direction and then a good editor will pull you back. But you have to trust yourself.
Yeah, otherwise, that's a good piece of advice. Obviously, having worked, as you say, run courses in different bits and pieces. What would you say, in your experience, is the most common mistake that new writers make, people that are just starting out?
Yeah, well, it comes back to show, don't tell. Chunks of exposition, chunks of information, and it's just boring. You can't get away with that these days. I mean, back in the day, like Herman Melville, he has a whole chapter, which is like a page out of Wikipedia, which is about Wales. George Orwell in 1984, he has chunks of political polemic. You can't get away with that these days. So I would say, I mean, on almost every critique, I comment on show, don't tell. Yeah, show, don't tell. That's the only rule, I guess. I mean, there are no rules, actually. The only rule really is to make it work. I mean, people sometimes say to me, can you change from first person to second person or whatever? Well, it sounds odd to me, but if you can make it work for your readers, fine. Make it work.
If you can pull it off, then do it.
Yeah.
Well, that's great advice. And so as we kind of, as we finish things up, do you want to just remind people where they can actually find you online or various social media if you're on it? And just tell people again, just remind them about the latest book and where it's out.
Sure. Okay. If you look at my website, it's just Leigh Russell, one word, .co.uk. If you look that up, you will find links to my Facebook and Twitter accounts, and you can sign up to my newsletter and get news of my new books, hear about what read about what I'm reading and all that kind of thing. I do interviews with other authors. My latest book in the Geraldine Still series is called Final Term. It's the 19th book in the series, and it's written for my existing fans, but also readers new to the series. And in March, I'm launching a new cosy crime series. And the first one of that is called Barking Up the Right Tree. But you can find links to all my books, everything I'm doing on my website. So I think that's probably the the best thing to look for. LeighRussell.co.uk.
And I'll put all that stuff in the show notes at joineduprighting.co.uk anyway. But for now, Leigh, thanks so much for your time. It's been brilliant chatting to you. Thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Well, thanks again. It was great.
Joined Up Writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Leigh, and I'll put all of the links in the show notes over at joineduprighting.co.uk. That's it for this week, other than me reminding you to make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts, and then you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every time. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I have mentioned that a few times this show. And also, really, don't forget, I need your input on the Joined Up Writing book. So that's it for this week, but thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.